All right, this is Tang here. Welcome to the Epic Meta podcast show. My name is Tang. I'm the host, and here's the
Hi,
co-host.
this is George, and I am the co-host of the Epic Meta podcast. I would say meta, but
Meta, Meta,
but I do like
Meta
you saying
podcast.
meta. So
Well, pronunciation aside, we will go right into topic here. Uh, let's discuss what this show is not, and we'll talk about what this show is. So, for those who just tune in or maybe they go back, from assuming they caught us, let's say, multiple episodes down the line, and now they go back and listen to the first episode. Today we'll cover what the show is not, what the show is, and we'll go into talk a little bit about COVID-19 as well, because I think this is a post-COVID-19 world, and the show just comes out and hopefully bring some sanity to this, share some sanity to this universe that we're living in. But what do you think the show is not, George?
uh, it's not defined. I think first of all, uh, you don't
Mm,
like that. Um, oh,
no,
that was it.
it's not defined. It's not defined as a show, but there are general topics we won't. I think we won't dive too deep on, such as we'll talk about the news, but we won't push the news as far as like this is the podcast you listen to for like all things related to science or something like that. We don't. This is not a theme show like that. We're not dedicated to certain 100% just all news or 100% all technology news, for example. So
Yeah,
that, in my opinion, is what the show is not going to
yeah,
be
and I
about.
generally agree. I don't think we actually know what the show is about. I think we're exploring what the show is about, and the show will tell us what it's about, or we'll discover it. Yeah.
We'll evolve. Yeah, it'll evolve from there. Perfect. That's very meta for a podcast show, I suppose. I was trying to explain. I think I talked to you about this offline, but I was trying to explain meta to somebody else, and I have a problem explaining the word meta or the idea of it. How would you describe it or define it?
It's basically when a concept sort of references itself in a way or extrapolates
Mm.
upon itself. So uh, the concept of metaphysics has to do with first principles. So what are the foundational principles that are in operation behind physics, behind the physical world?
Yeah, that's like asking what the word mean is, or the definition of words, or the philosophy of philosophy. Would that be a good parallel example of that, of what you're
Right,
trying to explain?
I think. And
So it's
yeah, and
just the
and the
word meta
times,
itself is newer, but the what it's referenced to has been around for a long time, as far as humans have been able to think.
yeah,
Would you say?
definitely. I think the times when you've sort of labeled something as meta have been times when, let's see, I'm trying to think of a specific example. Do you recall a specific example? Because I know you've sort of made that observation about conversations that we've had in the past.
Yeah, nothing comes to mind directly exactly this time. This is why we kind of want to plan a show and do a script and an outline because you lose track of thought, and that's why you need topic to focus on. But definitely between you and me, offline we have multiple meta discussion before, and I think comedians and philosophers are very close or adjacent to each other. I think a while back I follow a buddy told me that maybe comedians are the current philosophers of
Hmm.
our time. And if you look at it, at least for me, so I can't tell for you, but or for anyone out there, there's definitely comedians where people like and enjoy, and then there are comedians that I like and enjoy, and it's a lot different from everybody else. So when I watch something, there are comedians that make me chuckle, and it's a blur line, right? It's not a clear line, but sometimes the people who makes me actually laugh and cry are the people who observe
Hmm.
humanity itself, and then they critique it, but in a comical way, and the hard part of doing it. Whereas I critique it, I become a jerk and just grumpy.
Well, it's the spirit. It's the
But to
spirit
me,
that underlies the
yeah,
critique, right? That
mm,
yeah,
that's the trick.
that's the trick. Do you think? Well, I think that in the modern age that we live in, it's more difficult to actually have a critique of the sort you just described. I think because a lot of people are afraid uh, they're gonna offend certain groups of people. There's we live in sort of an age when there's lots of landmines you can step on, and the consequences for stepping on
Mm,
those landmines are is too onerous to risk stepping on them. I
mm,
think at this point.
yeah, yes. So I would say within, and the other thing I was gonna come back on, it was talking about when did this silly term meta come around? Because if it describe a concept that it's super old and since the original time, then how did this work become so popular and when it happened? Because I could never define it or find out. But to answer your question, yeah, I think there's a lot of landmines, and with how people react now and how connected this our world has become, things can be misunderstood or taken out of place real fast, especially if it's a world of sound bites and you don't get context. Uh, things you write, even it's hard to be sarcastic with word or text, but people can do it. And then you being, let's say, an artist or a comedian, and you do a soundbite or an interview, it can be clipped and taken out of place. So then you have to defend yourself, and
It's
yeah, it's very easy for things to go and blow up. And I hate that, but at the same time, I think the audience and the um, when and where you do something really, really matters
mhm.
now. So, especially for comedians or any kind of public writers or anything like that, you need to pick a setting where the whole context is revealed. And then if it's a debate versus a conversation versus, a monologue, well, then you need to figure out that format first before you just say things
Well,
and just
there's
risk.
two ideas
Uh,
that came to my mind based on what you just said. Um, the first is it's not just that things are taken out of context and it's sort of like an accidental thing. I think there are people who are looking for opportunities to um, be offended, let's say, and I think
yes.
the reason they want to do that is because it's sort of a power grab, right? You can sort of
Hmm.
so in a sense they sort of get off on that feeling of being offended. Yeah.
Righteousness. Yes.
Now I can kind of
Righteousness.
understand how this evolved because when I was a kid in like elementary school, you grew up in Vietnam, right?
I grew up in Vietnam for 11 years. I came here when I was
And
10
what
and a half.
year were you
So,
born? 82.
82. So, yeah, I came in 93. I remember seeing Lion King. So it was my first, American cinema experience.
That's a
So that
time
was my
reference.
first.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm about
Yes.
10 years older than you. Um, but my memory of growing up in like elementary and middle school was just that kids were just like unmercifully cruel and would look for like the slightest thing that they could, uh, make fun
Make
of or
fun
shame
of.
you
Yeah.
about, and
Yeah. I remember
some
that
people
too.
reacted to that by, standing up to it, and other people like myself sort of shrank from it. Um, but then I think there was a reaction sort of against that sort of culture. And maybe it's
Mm.
because people growing up in that.
Would you say that's Yeah, would you say that's the last 5 years, 10 years? Like, when do you think the culture shifted to where people are so sensitive? And I think the majority of humanity, people don't care, but it's just the few that are
Yeah,
loud,
well,
online that just make
yeah,
it
I mean, I
worse now.
think there were like, so you can look at it in this context. Like when I was a kid, uh, homosexuality was really taboo, I guess you could say, and if no one was coming out and announcing that they were gay, because if they did, they would just be, uh, you know, ridiculed. Yeah.
Ridicule.
So
Yeah.
that started to change, I would say, during the Obama presidency, I guess, right? So
Mm,
with the gay
yeah.
marriage thing.
I think culturally, I think it's the late 90s and the early 2000s where it's a little bit more open-minded.
Yeah.
But yes, definitely late 2000. Oh, geez, now I forget when Obama was
Um,
president.
he was
But
president until
yeah,
2008. Is that right? No, no, no.
man,
That's
that
no,
was a
no, no.
long time
That's
ago
George
now.
W. Bush.
No, that's
So he became president in
but
2008, and he left office in 2016. Obama.
yeah.
Yeah,
And since we're on the topic, gay marriage is now legal. Is it nationwide or still yeah, oh, Supreme Court same-sex marriage 2015 here. I'm looking up as we're talking. But that's yeah, that's to me that's a long time coming. So yeah, I guess that's a topic that you can't talk about anymore as far as picking at it, um, especially if you watch older comedians
hmm
on YouTube. Things can be taken out of context,
or
and it's
taken
just
in the
like
context they were very much meant to be in. You know,
yeah,
but
yeah. I think within the last year and a half, and I'll let you finish your point, but yeah, just last year and a half or two, people dig into each other's Twitter's history past, and I think that's just terrible.
yeah,
But yeah, to your point, you said you when you were growing up,
yeah. So
homosexuality was
just,
taboo.
right, and that's just one example. But kids would pick on other kids for all sorts of reasons. But the point is that I think people grew up in that environment and were probably traumatized by that environment, and then
Mm,
wanted to change things when they became old enough to sort of influence the culture. And that's what we're
hmm
experiencing now. But there's two sides to this story. There's obviously we don't want to live in a world where everyone is looking for the slightest opportunity to ridicule everyone else. I mean, that's just a
mm,
crappy environment to live in, and we recognize that. And so we tried to shift it to the uh, other extreme, which is also bad, where everyone's so afraid to offend other people, or people are so
mm,
ready to be offended that it it stifles creativity, it stifles actual truthful communications between people. So there's I think there's a
mm.
middle path that is ideal, and we're
Yeah, where you can both be respectful but also have social
yeah,
commentary
the
without
freedom
the
to express
backlash.
what you actually believe to be true.
Mm, fair enough. Well, that's what that's what the show covers. It covers everything. But I think what the show want to cover it is a lot of pop culture. I think you mentioned history and science, which I'm a big fan of. I don't know if you caught on to that or I've shared that with you in the past, but I'm a big fan of sci-fi, and for lack of a term, you can call me a
Okay,
futurist
me
as
too.
well. I like I like all the tech stuff. I like all the science, space, and just things that are on the borderline of what will happen to humanity when certain things or certain events occur. So I like that stuff. I like imagine humanity where, you know, we just don't do Earth anymore, but it's Earth, Mars, and other planets, stuff like that. Big
Have you
fan of that
read
stuff.
the
Yeah,
Red Mars trilogy?
I don't think
You,
so. No, I've been for the last year. I was reading one or two books of this series called The Expanse, and then they came out with a TV show, so I've been consuming that a lot. I don't know if you've heard of it
the
before.
Expanse? No, I haven't.
Yeah, you should check it out. It's on Amazon Prime now, but it used to be on Sci-Fi TV, and it covers not super far distance future, but just near future. And so it covers Mars, Earth, and the outer planets. So humanity hasn't discovered warp
Mhm.
drive yet, so you can't like warp anywhere in space, but we discover what I would call boost drive. So you can fly like really fast to the outer rings. And so the entire series, I don't know what Red Mars cover, but the series in the Expanse cover Earth and Luna is one entity or government body, and Mars is a second government entity body, and then the outer planets are, I guess, another organization. So there's conflicts with the three tribes of humanity, and of course there's like I don't want to ruin the series, but there's stuff going on where everybody's involved, and it's like mini wars and a lot of sci-fi covers humanity, which I'm not interested in, but being that I'm human, I have to be interested in it because a lot, like so. Let's say for Star Wars, you grew up in that generation, right? They call it a space
Mhm.
opera. So there's a lot of tendency for a lot of space opera, with a lot of human stuff, and I like the tech stuff, and I watch the show, and I like the expand because it covers enough of human drama where I can, you know, deal with it. But there's a lot of tech stuff that I like and future tech stuff that um, I find interesting.
So,
So, what does
okay,
Red
so
Mars
based
cover?
on what you just said, I think Red Mars is right up your alley. Uh, so
Mm,
there's three books. Red Mars is the first one, Green Mars is the second, and Blue Mars is the third. And
mm,
Red Mars talks about the first settlers on Mars from Earth, and so how they set up the initial colony, and then how it sort of spread around the planet. And in Green Mars, they go more into how they try how they begin to terraform Mars by building up the atmosphere, and uh, I forget what else they were doing. But and then Blue Mars is the point at which it almost has a breathable atmosphere, so you don't have to wear a mask walking around. And by the time Blue Mars occurs, the humanity has colonized other planets in the solar system, and
nice. Are there alien conflict? What's the core conflict in
so the
the
conflict
series?
really is the conflict between the government and people on Mars and the government and people on Earth. They sort of split apart,
Mm,
and
yeah,
um, and then there's
cool.
like a major disaster that occurs on Earth in one of the later
Mm,
books. So there's like a volcano that erupts that's under Antarctica, and so the sea levels rise dramatically because it melts the ice, and so there's
Nice.
lots of pressure um, to send a lot of immigrants to Mars to decrease the pressure on Earth, and so there's a lot of political kind of stuff going on. It's really good though. It sounds. I think you would like it.
Yeah, I'm looking at it on Wikipedia right now, and looks like one or two of the books one's like the Hugo Award and Nebula Award, which is pretty high up there for science fiction stuff. Um, the Expanse, with I haven't I don't know if the Expanse won anything, but definitely yeah, I'll check it out. If it's only 3 books, it's a little more consumable because they expand, they keep going, and at one point, I think I bought a digital book because I couldn't wait for the TV series, so I just kind of
Uh-huh.
read read the one book, and then I'm like, all right, let me wait because I'm a very visual person. Um, I like video games and all that stuff, and when it comes to action sequences, I have a hard time when I was reading any kind of novels understanding what is going on. I mean, I consume the words, but I can never actually picture it. So I don't know if you read what is it, Game of
Yes.
Thrones,
Yep. I read them.
but yeah, so I read them for a little bit, but at some point I just couldn't, for lack of a better word, see what is going on. And so when it comes to novels, like crime novels or anything like that, it's much easier than anything that's too much of a concept because I don't really get it, and I want to see it for
Hmm.
lack of a better term. So yeah, cool. I would recommend the Expanse if you. I'll check these out, see if we can get on the same page and maybe talk about in a future
Yeah.
episode. And it's funny because last night I was just looking around online and saw a little video commentary of Arrival. Have you ever
No.
seen that movie? So it's based on a short story. It has Jimmy Renner and Amy Adams in it. It's about alien arriving on Earth, but the story it's about this human lady. She's a linguistic person. She's a linguist, but the concept is not the aliens were teaching humanity how to speak their language, and in and with that, it's also explaining bring humanity to the concept of time as well. And so once you can understand how to read the alien language, your understanding of time is shifted to from a linear to a circular
Hmm.
understanding. So the aliens understand time as uh, a
Hmm.
circular timeline. So them to them it's all predestined. And the linguist in the movie, once she have the ability to understand um, the alien language, she also see her life or experience her life in that fashion. And so the core of the movie was asking, and I had this problem with myself. I think I had to evolve and basically adjust where, eh, free will versus predestination. Do you really have a choice? And something we could cover in a future episode
Hmm.
also. But once you see the movie, you should definitely check it out. It's and maybe we can talk about it in episode 2. But it's I used to be when I was younger. There is no fate in that you make your own your own life. But as I grew older, it's I don't know if that's 100% true. I think it's somewhere in
Yeah.
the
No.
middle.
I
What's
certainly.
your what's your take on the
Oh,
matter?
on free will. Um. Okay. There was one other direction I wanted to go before, but that's certainly a, a way we can go. I just wanted to recommend one other sci-fi book that is my all-time favorite forever. It's called, and you sort of touched on time, the experience of time. So that that I think is a good connection to this book. And the book is called The Man Who Folded Himself, and it's written by David Gerald, who also wrote
Hmm.
some pretty famous original Star Trek episodes. Um, but it's about a a person who was given what's called a time belt, and he discovers that he can travel through time using this time belt. Now, normally I hate time travel because it's always written really crappily, and there's like so many
Mm-hmm.
huge plot holes and just it doesn't make any sense. But this book is incredible. Like this was a
Huh.
time travel sci-fi book, and it's very short. It's only like 100 pages. But it actually
Okay.
made me cry. Like it
Wow.
so I won't say any more.
Yeah. Have you seen? Yeah, I'll check it out, and I think that covers a lot. It's like Red Mars trilogy, The Man Who Folded Himself. I recommend The Expanse, and to your last point with The Man Who Folded Himself. I don't know if you've seen
No.
Predestination. It's a movie with oh, I forgot his name. Uh, I think it's available somewhere, but I'm sure I'm sure it's so unique that I can't think that maybe it's based on some kind of, short story or something
Hmm.
like that. Let's see, what's his? Ethan Hawke is the main actor in it. Um, Very interesting because and I linked you on Slack, which you don't have access to, but when you sign up online, because you don't need to download, you can just go online. There's a
Yeah,
website and
my
you
computer
can check
blocks
it
it.
out. Um, there's a guy on you is a YouTuber and he talks about some of the stuff and you know if people think they have all this free will and it's sad to say, but I'm really a conglomeration of all the things that I've experienced, like the books I've read and the friends I hang out with and the family that I grew up in. And so at some point, all these ideas that I thought were independent, like, I'm a critical thinker. I originate these ideas. I made all these decisions. But then now I question if I grew up in a different culture and have different family and read different books, uh, would I think the same way? How much of me is really me where I can
Right.
determine my own
But
self-thinking
well,
process. And that scares me because now I'm like, well, if I'm a sum of all my influences, then how much of it is really me? If you just
right,
take the
is
same
there a real me
uh
buried underneath there somewhere? But also think about this. You don't even know the next thought that's going to occur in your head, right? They just sort of pop
mm-hmm.
out of nowhere, and
Yep.
we take credit for them when they do. But like, I mean, do you take credit for your heart beating or your blood circulating or your pancreas secreting insulin? But you
Yep.
consider that
Mm.
you, right? But we sort of
Mm.
agree that we're we're not really responsible for that, right? That just sort of happens on its own. But thinking sort of happens on its own too, But
Yep.
in order to make sense of it, I think we we sort of sit in this place
Claim.
where we sort of assume um, that that we create our thoughts and that's linked to
Mm.
our sense of self, right? But the more you think about that, the more that it falls apart. So we just don't think about it, right? we just we just
Oh
sort
yeah.
of push that to the
Oh
back,
yeah.
right? So
Correct. Yeah. I definitely. If you go with the frequency theory, it, they have a hard time explaining the mind. They call it the heart problem. It's the same YouTuber
is
that
this
that
an
I was watching.
AI,
And
artificial intelligence kind of conversation?
no, it's basically a consciousness
Okay.
conversation. And so the video was talking about where does consciousness come from. and scientists and philosophers or whoever, they call it
Hmm.
the hard problem because they couldn't really define it. And so I think basically the YouTube ends on the fact that the best that we have is frequency. So when you have a bunch of brain cells that fires and shoot up at a certain frequency, it's not an explanation, it's a correlation that consciousness tends to happen. And that's it. That's the
Well,
best that they can kind of come up with at this time in all of humanity is basically consciousness kind of come from a vibration of
it's a
frequency.
byproduct.
But there's no proof, right? Because the best proof that we ever have is come from philosophy. I think therefore, and that's it. That's all we can do to prove that we are uniquely individual and we are self-aware and all that jazz. But you ask any layperson on the street, and they're like, this is not a discussion you have at a bar
Sure it
drinking a
is.
beer. And
What else are you
but
going to
well,
discuss?
I guess certain crowds, I guess the people who I hang out with, and it's rare to the friends I have in college are some of the best buddies, and now we live in different parts of the world, and it's really hard to have the same
Mhm.
vibe. And then at the same time, it's not an answerable question, and so a lot of time I think when I hang out or do something, it's just not something you enjoy doing, figuring stuff that you can't answer.
You don't
Uh,
think you can answer it?
you know, no, I do not know where consciousness come from,
Well,
and
have you
it's
considered that you're looking at it backwards? That
no, I
okay.
don't know what that means.
So it seems
I
so
so the show is called Epic Meta, and you're definitely the meta portion, and I'm definitely the epic because slowly it has become an adjective that I've used for almost everything, kind of like cool or groovy, but instead I just use epic for no reason, and that's plus I couldn't find a Gmail account with just meta, so that's the show title because of that reason.
nice. I like that.
But yeah, how is the question backward? I mean, what would you
Okay,
ask?
you presented the idea that consciousness sort of is generated from the firing of specific nerve cells. Is that what you said? Yeah.
Yeah, basically that's the
So
conclusion that
that assumes that consciousness is generated from a material source, right?
no, it is not. They cover in this video. They cover the fact that it could be. I mean, I guess material in the sense that it's organic, or you're saying just uh, because the video covers it could be
No, no, no.
inorganic as long
Yeah,
as
it
there's
doesn't have to be
frequency.
organic or inorganic. It's just if you align certain material together in
Mm,
this in a specific way, then consciousness will be generated.
yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Well, and it's
So
not.
I,
It's
I think it's
yeah.
the other way
It's a
around.
recognition. It's not a. And what's the other way around?
That consciousness comes first before materiality. That you don't get
Mm,
materiality without consciousness. Consciousness is the
hmm.
fundamental unit of reality.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
So in that
So
sense, like consciousness is distributed across physical reality, and but there are nodes of you know stronger nodes of consciousness that exist in people's heads, say, or animals, or even plants, or. But basically, it's everywhere.
right. Well, I don't know if it's. I don't know if
Are
our.
you an atheist?
I
Thing?
don't know if our theory.
Oh, okay. So,
Yes. Yes, I am. I'm what you call currently a
uh
closet atheist. So it's kind of like I guess the term on culture, a closet atheist. But I used to be I grew up in a Catholic
Okay.
family, so I think until I was probably teenage years, and then I eventually go to college, and then I just couldn't correlate the two anymore, and I was like, this I gotta stop. And then of course now with everything, you find things to you know prove or defend your points even more, so it doesn't help. But yeah, I would categorize myself as an
Okay.
atheist.
I also
So,
grew up Catholic, and I'm not so enamored with the Catholic Church these days, but a I believe wholeheartedly in God. So this is cool,
mm,
fertile ground for conversations going forward, I would think.
yeah, I want to know how you what's the word uh how you deal with like the two conflicting notions or
Well,
ideas.
is there a specific
But
conflict that you have in mind?
well, uh, are you still religious
I
or not?
So I do still attend Catholic Church, although not with the frequency that I used to. I I I grew up with in that sort of ritual and tradition and symbology, and I relate to it. I feel like on a pretty deep cultural level. In terms of
Mm,
the theology and the tenets of the theology, there is some conflict there, but um, I don't know. I just sort of I sort of like still participating in it, even though it's not really,
hmm
even though it doesn't really generate the spiritual experience that I would like, and so for that I go elsewhere.
hmm
But I'm yeah, I'm hanging on to it just because there's a lot of deep cultural stuff there, and I sort of like it. I like it.
I guess. Yeah. I mean, there's certain COVID-19 aside, I back in the day it would be, holiday Christians that I partake in, but I wholeheartedly don't no. I don't advocate for
Nor
it.
do I.
I think being religion free allows you to see the world much better. Um, versus following a dogma of thinking. And, you know, same thing with like what we talked about earlier with predestination versus free will. It's like it's much better as a human experience, I think, for you to decide and pick and choose versus um, not having that choice and already program a certain way. And
I think there's arguments
you
that
know
could be made for both sides.
sure,
Eh,
absolutely. And I'm sure there's a balance of, what's the best version or outcome. But yeah, if to poke a hole in your consciousness theory, which is I don't know, either ways you can't really prove at this point. If you think consciousness come first and the everything else is a pattern or a recognition of it, then at what point do you think consciousness occur in a new human being, like a baby?
Uh,
Or do you think there's different levels of
oh,
consciousness, for
there's
lack of a better term?
absolutely different levels of consciousness. I mean, do you
Mm.
disagree with that?
No,
I mean,
I
would you
think,
say a dog has consciousness?
yeah, I think. See, that's the thing. Like, how do you define something like that, right? Because it used to be if an animal recognized itself in the mirror, then it's conscious, right? But I think there has to be a different level of consciousness because sometimes we see animal behaviors that we recognize as human
Hmm.
behaviors, right? It's like group or love or hate or anger, all this stuff that animals sometimes do. Um, that you're just like, whoa, does it understand what's going on? Because it seemed
Yeah.
like it does, right? Because I've seen videos of animal being traded or abused, and it's basically just kind of commit self suicide. And I was like, what? That's crazy. But there has to be levels because I don't remember. People say like they remember things when they're like 3 or 4, but I don't remember anything.
Well, but
Maybe it's a
memory
suppressed
and
memory.
consciousness are not the same
Yeah, that's.
thing. I mean,
Mm,
consciousness, I mean, the way I would define consciousness is just the ability to perceive, right?
mm. Does it have to be perceive the world or just perceive like, hey, you exist. You're yourself,
So if
individual
I was
being.
blind, deaf, dumb, had no arms and legs, you know, and uh, like
Hmm.
if there was somehow my brain still functioned, but I was totally detached from a body, I would still be conscious,
Hmm.
right? If the brain was still alive, like
Right.
I could
Right.
perceive the passage of time. Let's say I could remember what it was like to have a body. I
But you perceive yourself in the
Yeah,
world,
perceive
for
your
lack of
own
a better term. Okay.
existence and and
Okay.
the world itself too.
Okay. I think that's a fair definition. It's
So
hard to,
I mean, and using that
it's something I haven't
and
given a lot
using
of thought
that,
about.
you could say that a jellyfish has consciousness, right? Because they react to the world and they find food and they do whatever jellyfish do.
But does it perceive itself?
I I I think if you perceive the world, wait. So are you saying so,
Does it know itself from another different jellyfish? Like I am a unique jellyfish. Does that
so
equal
it, in
consciousness?
your mind, consciousness doesn't? It's not enough to just perceive other things.
I don't know.
That's
I don't know
consciousness to
because
me.
I guess it's enough.
There's
I guess it's different levels. We have to
self-awareness,
agree.
I think, yeah, is a higher level of consciousness.
Mm. Yeah, this is the other thing. I have a problem too, because being self-aware, does that mean you have to question your own existence? Because, a baby can run around, understand that, hey, if I stick my finger in this electricity hole, it hurts. And that's definitely, consciousness and self-awareness. But I don't question much,
Yeah.
right? And you have to agree with me on that. So to me, it's a gradient of existence, and at some point it's automatic, like like cells in a human being just do what it's programmed to
Right.
do. But then eventually you're at a stage where you compose all the experience you have and memories and all this stuff, and then you exist in that conscious level. So yeah, there's no way to prove or we have to I think come to a gradient level of understanding of that. And unless you major in philosophy or something like that, I think most of humanity don't bother to question all that stuff and don't look at it all that much. It's not interesting. You say you want to talk
Yeah,
talk
I
about
mean,
this stuff and drink a beer at a bar, but I can tell you right now, 98% of humanity don't care all that much. Maybe unless you read Stephen King or God, I like this guy too, and I don't remember his name. Let me
do you
go look it
think
up.
humanity should care about that? Or do you think it's okay that 2% cares about it?
I think I'm underestimating humanity
Mhm.
most of the time, but they have proven, or I say they, it's even better. Uh, I've been disappointed all the time, like more than I've been uplifted by what the things we've done. Um, and it just, it just, I guess you can call me a pessimist, but it's just, I call myself a realist. And it's like there's no point in hoping humanity will figure itself out and care about certain things. And it's just like, yeah, I just give up because going to sci-fi books and all this stuff is much better. And even let's say it's 10%, let's say 10, 15% of humanity. That's a lot of people. Um, I don't think sci-fi sells all that much. People like the human drama crap of all this other stuff, and the few that find all this stuff interesting isn't that much. Most
But
people
maybe that's the
just
way it's supposed to be.
you know
Maybe that's okay.
maybe, but I don't know if you ever read Starship Troopers by Robert
I
Heinlein.
did read it, and I've seen the
It's
movie, of course, too.
Yeah, the movie's terrible. That's my first understanding was the
I
movie, which
love the
I
movie.
thought was a joke. I would say at this point is a good bad movie,
No,
but the movie
it
came out when I
it
was
it was
yeah.
a
It's so when I experienced the movie, it was I was younger and I was like, this is terrible. This is there's no plot. It's just bad.
it was a
But
satire, though.
uh,
It was made by the guy who made RoboCop. Have you seen that movie? Yeah.
yeah. I've seen that movie. But at the point where I understood, I thought it was, like a serious movie. And then
Well, it was a
much
serious
later,
satire.
because I didn't,
I mean, there were some comedic elements to it,
well,
but I think,
I thought it was an, I thought it was an action movie. And it was just a bad action movie because it was so
but that was
cheesy.
intentional.
And then, well, now I understand it's a good bad movie, right? Like
It's a good
I don't
movie.
know if what you're saying.
It's a good movie,
We
disguised as a
might,
good bad movie.
well, later, like much later, I realized there was a book. I gave it a shot and read the book, and to be honest, the space fighting the bugs is like not even the core of the
Right.
book. The core of the book was, you know, I would call a blend of science and philosophy on, what humans do. And so that I
Political
found was really
science
cool
too.
because of for yeah, I guess
Well, it's about
it covers
totalitarianism and
yeah, and people having jobs assigned and citizens having the right to vote and it's all this other stuff that I guess normal novels don't cover. And so I like all that stuff because it digs into certain questions that give you a frame on how to
mhm.
think of something. So without that, it's really hard to answer questions like, consciousness, AI, all the stuff that I find interesting. And so I like all that stuff because at a minimum, they give you a frame of moving a certain way. But yeah, cool stuff. Yeah, I don't know the time marker on yours, but we cover about 45 minutes now. We haven't talked about the big deal in our world today. I think part of this show should
Uh-huh.
cover the news, maybe not so much pop cultures,
You want to talk about
but
COVID-19? Yeah.
we have to because this is where the show is starting from. It's currently May 2nd,
hmm
2020. I typically, when I was doing, I don't know if you see my other videos on YouTube, but I didn't do a date um, because I didn't know how long it would take me to do post-production
hmm
on these videos. But because of this format, maybe my turnaround time will be a lot faster. So we'll put a date on it um, and do, first episode May 2nd, 2020. We have to talk about the current condition too. Maybe down the line, future news, world events, anything that we want to talk about, I suppose. But keep it so that we don't limit ourselves on certain things. But yeah, no.
Okay.
COVID-19 is a mess, and I don't know if we're gonna get out of it until I don't know what's the world's gonna look like after COVID-19. Maybe that's our it should be our spin on it. Post
Well,
COVID-19
it feels like an
theories.
inflection point. It feels like the system had been pretty stable, although dysfunctional, and had been sort of going along for like the past, I don't know, since 9/11 or whatever. And and this sort of is forcing a change. Like the, there's going to be things that no longer work because of COVID-19 that will have to be discarded, and we'll
Yeah.
have to make changes on a societal level. I mean, One thing I think
Yep.
about is like all the money they're spending. I mean, the federal government. Um,
Mm.
eventually, so we've been on this path for a long time of deficit spending, and it's been fine because we were able to cover the interest on the debt,
Mm.
and it doesn't the interest on the debt, as long as our economy expands at a certain rate, is manageable from a
Right.
but at a certain point, it's not manageable. And I don't know if this if going through this will push us into the not manageable part of the history of that. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, my brother-in-law used to work for Congress, and I told him
Mm.
I used to be very worried about the national debt when I was younger. I don't know why I was
Mm-hmm.
worried so much about it, but for some reason I was fixated on it. And I talked to him about it one time. And he's like, "Look, the you do what works until it doesn't work anymore, and then you got to do something. Then you
Is
got to
he
do
a
some."
is he a staffer that works under a
Well,
congressman or
right now he's dead. But at the time, no,
Oh, I'm
yeah, he
sorry.
had a sudden heart attack. He died when he was in his 40s.
Mm.
So it was, yeah, kind of tragic. But or not kind of, it was tragic. But he was like what's called like it's either legislative assistant or administrative assistant, and he was in that
Mm.
role for more than a few Congress people, and so it's
Ah,
basically the guy
okay.
who runs the office for. It's like the chief of staff in a congressional office.
Yeah, so typically my understanding of how all this stuff works is and of course my understanding come from silly TV shows and stuff. You work underneath, like a senator or a
Mhm.
representative, or you work for an office of something. But yeah, no, national debt, uh, economy. So I'm a big fan of Andrew Yang, and obviously he's out of
Mhm.
the race now. But I like his concept of UBI, and I kind of want to know how we're gonna figure all this out as well. Because I think now we're in a much better place if we get up the infrastructure up and running. So there's a lot of investment, and of course a lot of tech investment in regards to like testing kits, those breathable devices.
Respirators.
Uh, Yeah, respirators. We'll have all that stuff. If we have something again, the production line is there, the supply chain is there once we get through this. But economically, like you said, I don't know, because with the job loss coming and with everything coming, it might not work anymore. And what's his name? The guy. Oh God, I have to Google him. The guy who owns Twitter just
Jack Dorsey.
invested, Jack Dorsey. I think last month invested a significant portion of his wealth into investigating UBI as well. And so even the wealthy recognize that if there's no economy, middle class society, like it's just not going to be sustainable. And so we have to come into some kind of concept of, socialism. And that's a word that's like triggering to a lot of people, but the reality is you can't sustain capitalism forever if there's no market.
Not only that, but
If people, yeah,
I think the system that we're currently in, that I think is breaking down, assumes,
mm,
and this hasn't been true for a while, that people get jobs and then keep them their entire working life and then retire.
yeah,
And that
that
just
is
isn't the case anymore.
that is,
So,
yeah. I
so
think when I
just
was in college, I was
sorry to
exposed
interrupt,
to.
but just
Go
look
ahead.
at health insurance. Our system sort of assumes
Mm.
that people get stable employment and then their employment gives them health insurance. And both of
Yep.
those assumptions are not so I mean,
Yep.
I am, and I think you are too, in a lucky position where we have employment that gives us health insurance. But
Yeah.
for most people, or I don't know for most, but for a huge segment of the population,
Huge. Yeah.
they get jobs, they lose jobs, they go through periods of unemployment, and so to
Yep.
assume that health insurance should be given by an employer,
It's not.
just it doesn't work anymore. It has to be from
No.
a stable source in the background that, and then that will,
Yep. Isn't
right,
tied
and then
to a
that will give
job.
people freedom to move from job to job and
To,
not have to face
yep.
financial catastrophe if they get sick in between.
Yeah. Well, single pair. It just gotta be, the way. And oh, I hate to say it, but more evolved countries have already done it. So it's really, I don't know. Well, I do know. I have a theory, but that, later asides, yeah, we need to shift to that. I think the powers that be obviously don't want to, but it's gonna happen eventually.
Yeah,
So,
well, we'll
yep,
do what works until it stops working. And I think we're in the phase where all this stuff is hitting the rocks. Yeah,
not
yeah.
working.
And I'm not,
Yeah,
and I have no idea how it's really all going to play out, but it does seem like the system's just breaking down at this point. So that's kind of a good thing. I
yeah.
mean, maybe there'll be a period of destability for a while, but we should come out on the other end more stable. And I think a lot of people grew up or lived their lives, the majority of their lives, feeling like the system was somewhat unstable and sort of anxiety producing. But it was able to sort of
Mm,
keep going, because it works just well enough.
mm.
But I think we'll have COVID-19 might be just the event to break the system such that it needs to be
Mm.
rebuilt on a more stable uh, foundation.
Wow, you're so positive. You're an optimist.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I am. I am.
I hope so too. I hope so too. And uh, I was exposed to when I was in college, exposed to Michael Moore, the
Yeah,
documentary filmmaker, and his films aside, whatever, he's not perfect, but what he said, one of his core messages, people coming out of post World War II, with the massive population and the boomers and industrialization, they have this pattern of thinking that you get a job, you work in a place, and then your kids go to college, they do better, blah blah blah. That's not sustainable. And if all this hasn't come to that, it's gonna be so sad because more than anything now, people can kind of understand, economy and job stability is not what you need. Yeah, and you definitely should not tie healthcare to that, among other things. But yeah, so maybe we'll figure all that out.
yeah.
I hope
It's
we
not
do.
sustainable,
I,
but it works for a time,
hmm
and then it hits a period where it stops working, and then you got to come up with something new. So I think that's where we are.
Yeah, yeah, yep. Well, that's our little segment on
Yeah.
COVID-19. Is there is there any other pop culture news you want to cover?
I can't think of anything. My timer says it says 59 minutes.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's a good uh well, I don't know if good, but I think it's enough topics we covered today. We covered quite a bit, from all
Yeah.
the conceptual consciousness, predestination, and of course a little bit of world events as well. I think we'll sign off and then we'll stay on to do some planning for our next episode. But thank you so much for anyone who's tuning in. And if you're tuning in the future and going back to listen, well then, I hope you like it as well. It's the first episode, so we're a little bit unorganized at this time. But maybe in the future we'll keep it down to certain segments, and then do the show and keep it to the segments and then sign off. But anything you want to
Well,
say
you're
before we
witnessing
close
the
out?
evolution of this podcast. So enjoy the journey.
All right. All right. Well, thank you so much, anyone who's listening, and Tang and George signing off.
Bye.
See ya.